seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in oh my God! 30! No 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Oh! What a miracle finish!
And welcome to the State of Purple podcast. I am Aj Mansour, here as I am joined every week by Jack Day from KFAN and KFAN.com. We are the hosts of the State of Purple podcast. We're going live today, live stream on my Twitter account and the KFAN YouTube channel. So if you're joining us via the video stream, this is the first week you're here. You're an early adopter for this adventure, and we appreciate you joining us. But each week, usually on Tuesdays, but this week got a little weird, we record an episode of the State of Purple podcast, and then we're available for breaking news as it comes up to get a little mini episode in there as well. But it's good to be back. Good to have a live audience to some extent. If you have any comments or want to partake in this show, by all means, throw it in the comment section and join in on the fun. We'll get some comments up on the screen and answer your questions as well. But Jack, I don't know if you've noticed, it's a little different environment for me right now. I'm outside. No, I'm not just enjoying the 90-degree weather. My house is a madhouse right now. So I've taken to the front porch to kind of get away from that. I see you're in your comfy little office den like you always are. So if you hear some sirens in the background or a semi-truck that drives by, let's just excuse that and just understand that it's better than the chaos that is inside my house with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old that are fighting all the time. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's a bit, I know we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but it's kind of a slow news week in terms of Minnesota sports when you have a struggling Twins team. The Wild just got eliminated last Friday, I believe it was, from the playoffs, and Vikings football is really all the state has to look forward to at this point. I know training camp doesn't really start until the end of July, but it's really the only thing we have going for us that we can talk about.
Yeah, no doubt. As you can see, listening on the podcast, you probably saw in the title. For those of you that are streaming live, you can see on the screen right now, we're going to talk about some contracts. We're going to talk about some free agents, and we're going to talk about some injury situations that have popped up this week. And then we have a special surprise. It regards an article that I posted to KFA.com today, talking about a former Minnesota Viking and a debut music album. We'll play a little bit of that to kind of give you a taste of what is up and coming as far as the world of music, hip hop, pop. I don't even know exactly what it is, but you'll get to see it a little later. But Jack, let's dive right into the nuts and bolts. Like you said, pretty slow news week, so we're kind of pulling teeth here. We're kind of trying to find some things to talk about. But we did get past that June 1st deadline, that marker that we had on the calendar to kind of observe what was going to happen, not only around the league, but here for the Minnesota Vikings. And when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings, what that means is we've had some contract situations that have played out. Roughly $7 million or so from Kyle Rudolph's contract off the books now, back into the salary cap availability for the Minnesota Vikings. Lots of speculation, Jack, on what they should do with that. Should they go out and look for free agents? Should they talk to Danielle Hunter and maybe figure out how they can get him a little bit of a bonus and back on the football field now that we're 2 weeks into OTAs and we have not heard from Danielle? Mini camps around the corner. We don't know if he's going to be there. What are your thoughts as far as this extra money that the Minnesota Vikings have with this June 1st deadline? What do you think specifically that they should do with that money?
I have a feeling that a lot of this money is going to be kept in-house. They still need to sign a few of their draft picks. I think mid-round draft picks still need to be signed, a few of them. And then they're going to have to sign guys to the practice squad when they get to that date as well. So there's guys like Harrison Smith's name, Brian O'Neill's name, and then, like you just mentioned, Danielle Hunter. Those are 3 guys that are potentially deserving of contract extensions and could also potentially free up some more cap space this year and into the future potentially. But the Danielle Hunter situation is probably the most intriguing to Vikings fans, because we saw what this pass rush was last year without Danielle Hunter, and there's really no one that's proven that can step into that role and take over for him. And Mike Zimmer said yesterday in his press conference too, he said, I haven't talked to Danielle Hunter. We'll see what happens when we get to minicamp. That should be a little bit worrisome for Vikings fans, because obviously there's been reports that date back all the way back to the football season of last year saying Danielle Hunter is frustrated with his contract. I think he's making a little bit less than half of what a guy like Nick Bosa is making. And I think I saw his paycheck was ranked 17th amongst all edge rushers, which obviously I think Danielle Hunter is a top 10 edge rusher. So the frustration is kind of valid, but at the same time, he's coming off of a neck injury, which we just saw with Mike Hughes getting dished to the Kansas City Chiefs last week. Neck injuries, they can linger. They can be scary. They don't know if Danielle Hunter is necessarily back to 100%. So I don't know where there's this topic circulating around Vikings Twitter is who has the leverage. And personally, I think the leverage is slightly in the hands of the Vikings, but at the same time, Danielle Hunter has been productive when he's been healthy. And my biggest question mark kind of revolving around that whole situation is, can the Vikings find a way to get an incentive-based deal, at least for the 2021 season, where if he hits his numbers and he proves that he's healthy, he'll get that extra money that he's wanting. But I just don't see the Vikings going out and giving him an extension when they don't know what they have. He hasn't been at practice, and quite frankly, I don't think he's passed the physical yet for the Vikings either. So it's a weird situation, and I'm sure we're going to follow it rather closely leading up into minicamp, which I believe begins the week of 6/14 or 6/15. It's one of those dates.
Yeah, we're seeing some comments come in right now from the viewers. Actually, we're live today, so the viewers are getting some comments in, and we're seeing a lot of the same sort of things. Jack is, he sat out a year. What sort of leverage does he have? Could this be a very bad decision for the Minnesota Vikings if they were to give him a big deal that he hasn't? I mean, he's earned it, but he hasn't proven that he is healthy enough to come back and play. Now, on the Power Trip Morning Show this morning, they talked about an interesting thing. I think Ben Lieber brought it up, saying that specifically with the defensive end position, neck injuries are worrisome. A position where you are rushing and physical contact is lots of hands to the face. You're getting your neck pushed. You're getting your helmet pushed. You're not supposed to, but sometimes it happens. You're really getting a lot of pressure put on that neck area. For a player that has a neck injury, it might be a little more worrisome than it would be for a defensive back or somebody who may not have as much hand-to-hand combat, right up in the trenches every single time. So an interesting point that former NFL player kind of brought up this morning that I hadn't necessarily thought of. I'm going to disagree with you, though. I think that Danielle Hunter might have the advantage, in my opinion, with this situation, and only because the Minnesota Vikings don't really have another option. We're already very thin on that defensive end position. They have the interior line pretty set with Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce. We think that at least they're going to be solid there. People are comparing them to the Williams Wall. That might be a drastic comparison, but at the same time, we have proven starters on the inside. On the outside, if Danielle Hunter's not there, what are we looking at? Because there's already question marks on the opposite defensive end side where he is not there. And if he's not on the field, then we have questions on both defensive end situations. We saw last year how this defense struggled so mightily because they couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback. Hopefully they'll be able to stop the run a little bit better with that resurgence on the inside of the defensive line. That was also a big problem last year. You can't stop the run. You can't get pressure on the quarterback. You're going to get picked apart. But the way that we look at this now, I don't like it. I really, really don't like it because I'm typically more so a franchise or a team-leaning person rather than the players. The players are, I like them. They're relatively replaceable, though. But in this specific situation, he signed a team-friendly deal 3 years ago or whatever it was, and we said that at the time. It looked very team-friendly. I don't know what advice he got and why he signed it or why that came up. But at the time, we thought if he blows up, this could be a very team-friendly deal. Well, he blew up that year, right? He had a great season, put a couple seasons in a row, and then the injury popped up. So now what do we do? And I just think that the Vikings don't have a choice. I don't think they have a choice to get anything different. There's really no free agent opportunities to get out there. They're already tied up a decent amount of money with him this year. So you want him to be a part of this team in the future, or maybe you don't. I guess I don't know. I'm speaking out of turn. If you want him to be a part of this team in the future, if you want that defensive end position shored up, you need to give him a little more money. I'm not saying that it's going to be top. I don't think he's going to get the top defensive end or top edge rusher money like he said that he wanted. I don't think that's realistic. But is he going to get a bonus or, like you said, an incentive-laden deal for 2021? I think there has to be something there when they do have this extra money that they just got. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think going back to what you said, taking that one step further, Yannick Ngakoue led the Minnesota Vikings in sacks in 2020, and he played a total of 5 games. That is atrocious. And obviously they go out and they get Stephon Weatherly, which I think that was more of a depth signing rather than a starting signing. Maybe he will end up being that starter if Danielle Hunter is there on day one. Maybe Weatherly starts opposite of him, but there's a lot of young guys on this roster as well. They used 2 mid-round draft picks this year on Robinson and Jones, and then you have DJ Wanham, who looks to make a step in his sophomore campaign as well. So it's going to be interesting watching and kind of seeing how the puzzle fits together throughout mini camp, throughout training camp. I think we'll have a little bit of a better understanding as who goes where. There's been different names all over the board in starting spots this week. I think Cronin reported yesterday that the 2 starting outside corners were Chris Boyd and Harrison Hand. So there's names kind of being shuffled everywhere right now. And it's too early. We mentioned this in one of our last shows. It's too early to really dive into that and say, hey, Wyatt Davis isn't starting at guard yet. Does that mean he's not going to be starting week 1? No, that's not the case. There's a long ways to go, but I think Vikings fans are starting to have a right to be a little bit worried about the Danielle Hunter news.
Yeah, no doubt. And we'll really find out. He'll start getting fined. He'll start getting penalties because it is required mini camp that starts next week or the week after that, like you mentioned. You mentioned the cornerback situation and how they're pretty thin there. Obviously, that Jeff Gladney situation hasn't really played itself out yet. Patrick Peterson comes in. You have some opportunities to bring some bodies in. But then, again, they brought a new person in just yesterday, I believe it was. I think the official news came down this morning. Tell me what you know about Ty Smith and what he might bring to this team.
Yeah, Ty Smith, he was a former 5th-round draft pick out of Seattle. I believe it was 2017. Maybe it was 2015 that he was drafted. And then he spent the last 3 seasons of his career with the Tennessee Titans, really just kind of he was a depth piece on that defense. I think it was 2 or 3 starts total that he made last year. Really a special teams type option. I think throughout his 3 or 4 year career, he's totaled 1 interception, 2 forced fumbles, and like 65 tackles, give or take, something like that. So I don't think this is a splashy signing. It wouldn't have been as splashy. It would have been a lot more splashy if they would have signed a guy like Breland, who was in for a visit just a couple weeks ago. But
did he land anywhere yet?
He has not yet. I haven't seen him gone anywhere. I think the last time I heard it was bouncing between Kansas City. I don't know if there was an offer on the table here. It was kind of a weird thing because there was a lot of stories that came out saying he was here on that Thursday, and then it was kind of radio silence afterwards. So it's kind of odd. I don't know if there was terms that just they didn't agree on in any way. But I look at the Ty Smith signing as a complete depth piece signing. I don't think, especially we don't know what's going on with the Jeff Gladney situation, which is a whole different topic that we can get into. But like I just mentioned, Courtney Cronin reported yesterday, Chris Boyd and Harrison Hand were the 2 starters on the outside. Mackenzie Alexander was there. That's because Patrick Peterson was not at practice yesterday. There was Zimmer mentioned in his press conference that there was somebody that had family stuff going on, and I don't know if that was officially confirmed that it was Patrick Peterson or not, but he was not at practice. I think Cameron Dantzler, this is his first week of OTAs, I believe I saw, so he was kind of sitting out. He wasn't getting reps with the ones. So that cornerback position, it is a lot less worrisome going into the 2021 season than it was in 2020 because you had Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney, kind of unproven rookies going out there. And I'm starting to like the depth of the position going into 2021. I know with Patrick Peterson, Mackenzie Alexander, and Cameron Dantzler, I think those are the 3 kind of locked in to be the starters. But then there's some added depth with the guy like Harrison Hand, who started to come into his own as of late in the 2020 season, and Chris Boyd has kind of been the bright spot of OTAs, if you will, because he's been in every single social video that the Vikings post. Chris Boyd finds his way into that video. So I think the depth is there. It's going to be an uphill battle. I said this. You can go read the full article on KFAN.com. But I think the Smith, he's going to have an uphill battle to be that like 6th corner to make the roster. And depending on the Jeff Gladney situation, potentially if he does see a suspension, maybe Smith comes in and he kind of takes that role away from Gladney until he comes back, if he comes back, whatever the case may be. But that's another storyline that we're going to have to monitor. I cannot say that word throughout the summer, because right now it's kind of a gray area and no one really knows what's going on.
Right. Yeah, it's a mess. You mentioned that there were some players that missed practice for one reason or another. Another player that did wind up on an injury report, I guess there's no real reports, but we did hear it from the coach's mouth yesterday, was rookie tackle Christian Darrisaw, who has a groin situation, a groin tweak, I think is what Mike Zimmer said. I had been a little critical of the decision to make these rookies prove themselves before you put them in with the ones. I think it's silly. I think, you know that at least Christian Darrisaw is going to be slotted in as your starting left tackle for week number 1. Very likely that Wyatt Davis is going to be your starting right guard in week number 1 as well. Why are we messing around? That's kind of the stance that I've taken. Dakota Dozier, we love him, but he's not going to be the starter. Why are we giving him starting reps? I mean, you get to gel this group and get them out there. So I've been a little critical of that. But then again, this week he misses practice because he has a tweaked groin. There comes a point where, and we're way too early for this point, but it is bothersome when you see players, especially rookies, who are supposed to be out there getting their feet wet, getting used to this, getting their hands on the ground and getting into this offense that are missing time. You can't prevent that, right? A tweaked groin is a tweaked groin. Maybe he slipped in the shower. Maybe he was running at the field and did it on practice. Who knows where it came from? Those are impreventable mistakes or situations there. But it is a little bit of a bummer that we haven't had him out there with the ones in week number 1. In week number 2, now we're dealing with a groin situation as well. I know you don't think that it's as big of a deal to get Davis and Darrisaw out there as I do, but at some point we got to get them mixed in a little bit more. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think if we're having this conversation and we're a week or 2 in a training camp, then I'm going to be in the same boat as you for sure, because it'll be worrisome at that point. I mean, they have to fully understand the playbook, or at least start to understand the playbook. We're still like a month or so removed from the draft, so they're still learning. And they're obviously, Zimmer mentioned this in his press conference as well. There's a lot to take in, taking that step from college football to the NFL, and they're starting to take that in and kind of drinking from a fire hose, if you will. So I did see a tweet from Tom Pelissaro that said it was more of a precautionary thing for Darrisaw. He had some sort of core muscle surgery in January, and I think maybe that could be a reason why he hasn't been practicing with the ones. Right. Maybe they're and we're not out at practice every day, so we don't necessarily. I'm kind of just guessing on this. I don't have. Excuse me, I'm a little bit sniffly, but I don't have any proof that says that Darrisaw wasn't practicing because of his injury, but maybe that was the case. Maybe they're kind of easing him in. And I did see Eric Kendricks was working. I think this was another Cronin report. Eric Kendricks is another one that was kind of off to the side, working on the rehab side of the field. And it sounds like, I don't have 100% confirmation, but this is a really cool story. If this is the case, with Kendricks out, it sounded like Cameron Smith kind of overtook his role, which obviously he's coming off of a weird year last year where went through some sort of COVID protocol, and they found something with his heart. They had to perform open heart surgery on him, and he's back on the practice field, which is a feel-good story for the Vikings. And I think if he provides some much-needed depth at a position that lacked depth, quite frankly, at all 3 positions in 2020. So when Barr went down and Kendricks went down, the linebacking core, we had a rookie Troy Dye that got thrown in there. Todd Davis was another name that they signed, but there's a lot more depth on this defense. And I think a lot of the storylines throughout OTAs that I've been reading, that I've been hearing about, it's been about this defense. I haven't heard as many good things on the offensive side of the ball, which is a little bit worrisome, but I'm not too worried about it yet, because obviously the Vikings had a top 10 defense in 2020. It was really the top 10 offense in 2020, and they needed to kind of get their defense to bounce back in 2021. And it's looking like that might be the case as we sit 5 or 6 days in the OTAs.
Right. And we typically see the defense come out a little hotter than the offense at the beginning of the season. They're a lot more reactionary, understand your assignments, understand what you're doing, but then you react to what the offense is doing. The offense has to learn a playbook. They have to learn timing. They have to get rapport with the quarterback. They have to do all those things, which is why it's important to get on the field and get those reps with everybody. But I'll move on from that. Before we get into a couple pieces of former Minnesota Vikings news, I do want to talk about a little bit of a transition. We mentioned the Kyle Rudolph money that came off the books at the beginning of the month. That tight end position is going to be an interesting thing to watch as training camp goes on and as we get into the preseason here. We have a comment from Rich, who wants to move Irv Smith Jr. to wide receiver 3, where there's still a void, and then make Conklin the tight end. I don't know if that's the solution, but with Kyle Rudolph off the books, not with this team anymore, there is an open battle for tight end. It's thought that it will go to Irv Smith Jr. Tyler Conklin did come on, but if it is Irv Smith, if it is Tyler Conklin, if it is a mixed bag of tight ends on the football field, what sort of impact or what sort of change do you think we will see from the lack of Kyle Rudolph in this offense this year when there's new faces out there?
I have a feeling they're going to pick up right where they left off, with or without Kyle Rudolph. This team is very well known for running that 12 or 13 personnel where they have 2 to 3 tight ends on the field. I think the real battle is going to come down to Brandon Dillon and then Zach Davidson, the 6th round tight end or 5th round tight end / punter / long snapper, whatever you want to call him. He made a spectacular catch this week, actually, a one-handed snag, which was up on the Vikings social media channels. But I think it was interesting because Mike Zimmer mentioned this. Somebody asked about Irv Smith kind of taking that next step and getting to that role of a tight end 1. And he made the comment of saying he doesn't really think that anything's going to change for Irv Smith. It's more going to change for Tyler Conklin, who I think they believe really took strides towards the end of last season. You started to see him coming into his own, both in blocking and in the pass catching game. I've been saying this the last several seasons. I think Irv Smith is due to have a breakout season this year. I said that last year as well, and it wasn't necessarily a breakout season. But what Rich just mentioned, you have a lot more flexibility with a guy like Irv Smith Jr. than they had with Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph was what he was. He was a great red zone target for the Minnesota Vikings, great community presence, but he didn't have that athleticism that Irv Smith Jr. brings to the table. You can bump a guy like Irv Smith Jr. out into the slot. He can come down and play the tight end position. He can run block fairly well too. So I'm excited to see the state of the tight end position in 2021. I'm excited to see if Tyler Conklin can kind of take another step. I mean, there's been several people calling him the Tyler Gronklin on Twitter, which I don't think is necessarily fair quite yet, but I do think the Vikings are going to stick to kind of some of the similar packages that they've ran over the last several seasons where they have 2 to 3 tight ends on the field rather frequently. They haven't really shored up that wide receiver 3 spot yet, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to not continue to do that when they haven't gone out and gotten a legit wide receiver 3 weapon. It's between Chad Beebe, BC Johnson, Amir Smith-Marset. I think that wide receiver 3 spot is a wide open battle throughout this summer, and I'm going to be interested to see who wins that at the end of training camp too. So I like the state of the Vikings tight end room. It kind of sucks seeing Rudy go because, like I said, he was such a good presence in the Minnesota, not only on the football field, but off the field with everything that he did for the Minnesota Children's Hospital and everything in the community standpoint. Great human being. He's going to be missed here in Minnesota, but I think Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin are going to be up for the task.
Before we get to the little tidbit that you stumbled on before we went on the show here that you can't quite make up, before you read the article that I posted today, KFAN.com, you can find it. Did you remember who Antone Exum Jr., he didn't go by Junior, I guess, in San Francisco or now, but Antone Exum, did you remember who he was?
I did, yes. I want to say there's a play, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I have a play from the 2017 season when the Vikings, and I'm going completely off memory here. I have nothing in front of me, so if I completely butcher this, I could be wrong. But there was a play where Anthony Barr against the Atlanta Falcons, I think they won a close one. It was like 14-9, something like that. It was the magical year with Case Keenum. But there was a play where Anthony Barr hustled all the way down the field. I don't remember who he stripped, but he didn't even strip him. He went up with his hand and just popped the ball out of his hands. I want to say Antone Exum Jr. was playing in that game, and he recovered that fumble. I could be wrong.
Was it the Bucks and Austin Seferian-Jenkins?
No, I'm almost positive it was Atlanta, and we don't hung up on it, but I think it was a game. It was the first season in Atlanta's new stadium. I want to see it. I'm going to look it up after the show. If I was wrong, I'll eat my words. But I remember who Antone Exum Jr. was, and I think he was involved in that play, but I'm not 100% sure. Well,
for those of you who may not remember Antone, he had a cup of coffee with the Minnesota Vikings, a 6th-round pick. He was a safety, went on to San Francisco for 3 seasons, 3 one-year deals, so it wasn't like a gigantic impact, but he started a couple games and saw a little time. But after the 2019 season, he was done with football. Antone Exum then went and had some heart surgery. Okay, we're going to get to the point of this is music, right? He had always been interested in music. I guess they were doing freestyle battles in the meeting rooms at Minnesota and then more so with San Francisco. But after his football career, he went and had a heart procedure. As far as heart procedures go, it was pretty routine. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it wasn't some gigantic open heart surgery like you talked with Cam Smith. But it was a normal-ish surgery that he was going to go in, and there were complications while he was on the table. Exum flatlined, right? So effectively he died. His heart stopped on the operating table. They had to jumpstart it, bring him back to life. He was able to recover, and kind of had this epiphany that he wants to focus on music and do the things that he loves. In 10 months, he recorded an album. It comes out tomorrow. Actually, I don't know how to say it. It's called, I want to say Cardinal Coffee, but it's an X instead of a C. So Cardinal Coffee. I don't know exactly how to say it. I'm going to change the view on this live stream right now because I have the video for one of the songs off of it. It's bizarre. It is entertaining. It is art, and it's not terrible. I mean, we've seen a lot of professional athletes who thought that they could rap, that thought that they could be part of the music game and do some things. You remember Shaq Diesel was one of them. Kobe Bryant did a rap album. Le'Veon Bell, Meta World Peace, just to name a few, and it never went anywhere. There's a place for this music. It's not my favorite, but there is a place in 2021 for music like this. So I'm going to play a song called Dark Kept Secret. It's off by Antone Exum. He goes by Exum for his musical name. It comes off his album that comes out tomorrow called Cardinal Coffee. We're going to go with. This is Dark Kept Secret. Jack, I'm going to play a little bit of it, have you watch the video a little bit, and then ask you what you think about it. All right, we'll cut it there. But first thoughts, on the music. Let's talk about the video. Antone Exum. Do you think he's got a future in the music game?
It's kind of catchy. The music itself is not. It's not terrible. I think a lot of times when you hear so and so athlete, and I know you mentioned this in your article that's up as well. It's when you mention an athlete and music, it almost always it's like, oh man, what are they getting themselves into? You go and you listen to it, and it's not very good. And that wasn't the case. I think he could use a little bit of working with some of his dance moves, and the video could be a little bit different. The video itself is a little odd when he goes from a close up into the eyes of the horse, and then it goes over to him after. It's a little bit
staring, like intimate staring.
It's different. The video is kind of weird, but the music itself, it's really not that bad. Maybe he does have a future. I know you mentioned that in your article. He was the guy getting into rap battles with his teammates in San Francisco. I will eat my words. I was wrong. It wasn't the Atlanta Falcons game. I looked it up. He did have 2 fumble recoveries in 2015 with the Vikings. He was in San Fran in the year 2017, so he wasn't on that roster, according to ProFootballReference.com. But yeah, the music itself, it's not necessarily. I don't know what genre that would necessarily be considered either, because it's different, but it's not bad.
I had a heck of a time kind of describing it myself, and I think I even said this in the article. It has a little Prince vibe to it. It has a little 80s pop vibe to it. It reminds me of The Weeknd a little bit. But you know, one of the references that I cited, somebody named Vant, it's a music industry person, said that he's the Dennis Rodman of football. And I don't know if that's just the look, but he's an interesting dude, a kind of a bizarre out there thinker as well, and some of the answers that he has in some of these interviews that I was reading over are kind of like, what where are you going with this, dude? Like, what are you talking about? But it's a creative mindset that puts out some decent sounding music. I don't know how deep the lyricists that he's working with, or if he does it all himself, are. I'm not an expert as far as that goes, but when it comes to just the first impression, I don't know that I'm going to listen to it when I go on a jog. Who am I kidding? I don't jog, but when I walk the dog, but it wasn't bad, and I've listened to it a couple times, and I haven't hated it since then. So I'm in. I think that there is a place for him to do a couple albums, and maybe if he hits the right chord, it'll blow up, and he'll have a single that'll make it onto TRL. Is that a thing still? I don't think it is.
I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't.
You know what TRL is? You're younger than I am. Do you know what that
I
is?
do not. I was gonna say I don't know why I'm even answering that. I don't know what that is, but
that hurts my heart. You don't even know what it is. Oh.
What did you say it is?
TRL, Total Request Live.
Yeah,
it was
idea.
It was like the top 10 music videos show on MTV every day. I'd come home from junior high or high school or whenever it was, turn on MTV, watch the end, Carson Daly, the end of TRL. Oh man, I don't feel old too often, but you just made me feel old. Oh,
my bad. I think it, like you said, it's not, I don't do much jogging either, but it's definitely not a song that you'd be jogging to, but maybe like a late night cruise. You're just driving around in your car. It seems like kind of like a jam. It's not, I'm not ready to say it's got a little bit of a rhythm to it, and it's really smooth. So it's interesting. Like I said, the music video, extremely interesting, but the music, not as bad as when you said that and you mentioned that was part of the agenda for today's show, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be interesting. And I listened to it, and that was my first impression. Like, it's really not that bad. I think the music video could use a little bit of work and make it a little bit less trippy / weird, but overall,
I think that's the whole point. Honestly,
that would be a fair point.
All right, Jack, let's wrap up the show with a little bit of a tidbit that is as too good to be true. You have to see it to believe it, and apparently it is, because it's making the rounds on social media. Tell us about what Bryant McKinney is up to nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know when this is happening, but Bryant McKinney is posting about, I've seen there's other Vikings legends that are older Vikings legends that I'm not 100% sure, the names are escaping me, but Bryant McKinney is the front and center of this for a reason. I don't think this happens by accident, but apparently they are going to be hosting a boat cruise on Lake Minnetonka. And that was a little bit early. I didn't necessarily understand what was happening. I had to ask my dad because I was a child when all that happened. And when I was, but anyways, the Love Boat scandal is apparently making a comeback, not necessarily a comeback, but there's going to be a cruise on Lake Minnetonka with Bryant McKinney involved, and let's hope it's not as the publicity isn't as negative as it was in 2005 or whenever that happened.
So I looked it up real quick. It is June 18th from 6 to 8 p.m. You can join Bryant McKinney, former Viking safety Robert Griffith, and Byron Chamberlain for autographs and a boat cruise on Lake Minnetonka. But like you mentioned, again, you didn't know what TRL was, so how would you know what the Love Boat really was? And you shouldn't know what the Love Boat was. But at the same time, it was the scandal that rocked the world of Minnesota Vikings football, and now former Vikings are profiting off of it. So good for them. Take your 5 minutes of fame, turn it into whatever you want, your post-football career, and they're going to get this thing sold out. I mean, it's going to be a where were you FOMO kind of a thing for Vikings fans to say that they were on Love Boat 2.0. Clearly, that's not what it's going to be, but the idea behind it, they're playing off that for sure. So thanks for finding that, Jack. That was kind of a funny thing. I hadn't seen it when you mentioned it to me before we went live, and it's pretty funny. So that'll do it for this week's episode of the State of Purple podcast. You can find old episodes of the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe. Subscribe to that podcast, rate the podcast. What that does for us is it helps you get every episode delivered straight to your phone. You get alerted when a new episode comes out, whether it's the every Tuesday episode or the random Thursday episode like we did today, or a breaking news episode that we'll jump in and do. What it does for us when you rate it and subscribe is it gets this content in the hands of more people. It helps the circulation and gets it out there. So if you're enjoying this, I'd appreciate you to share it and rate the podcast and just have fun with it. We're in the doldrums of the off season right now, but it's going to get fun, and we're going to have a lot of fun this regular season when there's news left and right and weekly recaps and previews of every game. So Jack, I appreciate it. You can catch Jack's work at KFAN.com. He is our primary Vikings beat reporter right now. You can find him on Twitter as well as at Jack_H_day. He'll be giving lots of opinions and sharing those articles as well on that social media account there. But until we get back for next week, this is the State of Purple podcast, KFAN's official Minnesota Vikings podcast. And it's the official one because it's the only one.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.